Alright, hello everyone. My name is Wesley, this is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a General Tso's chicken that is loosely inspired by the version that you used to be able to find at Panda Express. No longer there anymore because I think they discontinued it. It is pretty roughly inspired by it because I have made quite a number of additions to it. So, we're going to take a look at a couple of the things that I have changed. Mainly the main thing that I changed is that we're going to be double frying it. And I'm also going to explain why you need to double fry stuff, or why you should always double fry stuff. You should do it from now on. And I will explain all of that. I'm going to touch on all of those things. If you're looking for the recipes, those always live over on my YouTube channel, which is, if you're watching on Reddit, the YouTube channel that's living at the bottom of the screen. Those recipes, they tend to be pretty useful for folks who are trying to cook or reproduce the things that I'm cooking, because they tend to move a little bit slower and we kind of talk through each of the ingredients. And it's also a place where you can find all the written recipes, so a little bit easier to reference if you're trying to cook these things yourself. In addition to that, that's also where the concurrent live stream lives. So if you want to know what we're going to be cooking next, that's a good place to start, because there's a whole schedule of everything. I think it goes out about 3 weeks. So if you're looking for that stuff, that lives over on YouTube. We're working our way to 4,500 subs by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and give it a subscribe. Lots of fun stuff going on over there. If you have any questions, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about frying chicken, or double frying chicken, or General Tso's chicken. But I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least entertaining to watch. And we're going to dive right in. Yeah, oh wow. Thank you for the awards, cool. Alright, so as with a lot of the things that I cook, pretty much everything that I cook for dinner at least, we're starting off by crushing and mincing. That was 4 cloves of garlic. And next up we're going to do, that's going to be about 1 inch or about a tablespoon's worth of ginger, which we're going to finely mince. So the reason why you will notice that these 2 ingredients, they come up in almost every recipe that I have written, at least almost every savory recipe that I have written, is because they tend to work really, really well as we sort of build out layers of umami. So it's not necessarily that we want everything to taste like garlic and ginger, but more that we're trying to, like, umami is all about building, stacking in layers. So what we oftentimes you will see this element referred to as the aromatic element of a recipe, for the reason that we're looking for their aromatic qualities. So as we start stacking things on top, this oftentimes will be the very first thing that goes into a wok fry, which we then bloom out for their aromatic qualities really, really quickly, probably about 10 seconds, no more than that. And then from there we start building and stacking stuff on top. Hermina, how's it going? Yeah, hello. Not bad. So this is my ginger. With the garlic, you'll notice that we didn't do very much. All I did was give it a good smack with the flat of my knife. And then pretty much just gave it a rough chop, and then everything sort of fell apart from there. With ginger, however, because it is a root veggie, it does require you be a little bit more thorough. So what we're doing is we're actually going to go through and do our fine mince. So that we're starting off with a, I guess you could call that a dice, so a small dice. And next up, what we're doing is our fine mince from there, which is really just all about persistence, actually. I think that's the real key to doing a fine mince. If you want, you could probably stop at this point. It would probably be okay. But the real key to a fine mince is just actually, the main key is having a very, very sharp knife. Otherwise, after that, it can get really, really tricky. I'll do it for our ginger. So these are going to go into our wok fry very, very first once we finish with our ginger, or once we finish frying our chicken. And then we will go for their aromatic qualities at that point. Cool. Okay, so next up, so if you are following along, so I know lots of folks who watch over on YouTube have gotten in the habit of, especially with this particular recipe, lots of people have been cooking along with this one. Lots of folks have been cooking along with the live streams because that's where all of the recipes live. So if you want, you can go over to the live stream over on YouTube, and there's a whole list of all of the ingredients for the thing that we're cooking today. So you can cook along with me. So if you're following that recipe, what we're going to do, I'm going to deviate a little bit because the original recipe that I did, it did not include any other vegetables. So it was literally just fried chicken with a glaze. So I'm going to add a couple of veggies that is basically coming from our Panda Express hack, which was the first of the 2 recipes video over on YouTube. So the first of which, this is going to be a red bell pepper. By the way, a red bell pepper upside down. That's the best and easiest way I've ever discovered of cutting a bell pepper. What's most important about bell peppers as you chop them up, though, is you want to remember that they have this white membrane inside right here, all of this stuff. This stuff is really bitter, especially if you're going to eat the bell pepper raw. So if you're chopping it up for like a salad, for example, you want to make sure that you don't leave this stuff behind because it's going to be really, really bitter to bite into. So what I like to do, even when I'm stir frying, is pull this stuff out. But especially if I'm doing a salad or something like that, you want to pull all that stuff out. Otherwise, you're going to get a real bitter taste to your bell pepper. All right, so for our bell peppers, what we're going to do is, how do I do this? I'm going to go for a large dice today. So I think my main objective for our bell pepper today, actually the main objective for all of our veggies today, is to have them in similar sizes of chicken. So the real goal with here is to get consistent bites so that we don't have any weird or oblong shapes and sizes going on in our stir fry. So to that end, what we're going to do is chop them into a similar size and shape as our chicken is going to end up, which is like a roughly large dice, so something like this, or thereabouts. RKK6, yeah, how's it going? Hello. Hello to everyone just tuning in. Hello everyone on Reddit and YouTube. We need more counter space. Yeah. General Sal is a World War II hero fought in the Croatia against the Croatians. I didn't know that. I actually just assumed that he was made up. I just assumed that General Sal was a made-up war hero. There's actually a really great documentary that inspires actually the series that this recipe is based off of, called Search for General Sal. That's a really fun one. Cool. So that's our red bell pepper. We're going to set these aside. These are probably one of the vegetables that we're going to be eating. These ones are going to be a little bit more durable than the others. So these are going to go in relatively early. So we're going to throw them in right after our green beans, which are by far the most durable veggie. So at this point, if you don't have any or all of the vegetables that we're using today, you can absolutely start riffing at this point. You can leave them out entirely. You could also just go with onions. You could go with any kind of leafy green. You could do broccoli. All of these things would work out great. These happen to be what I have on hand, mainly because Oh, last week, yeah, last week that's what it was. I was shooting a recipe for string bean chicken, or green bean chicken, which is going to come out in a couple of weeks. So I have some leftover bean sprouts from that recipe, so I'm going to use them up. But whatever you have, use them up. What's most important about bean sprouts, though, so you'll notice, especially if you've ever like bitten into a raw bean sprout or even an undercooked bean sprout, is that they are extremely durable vegetables. So kind of reminds me of like a broccoli, where that because they have so much denseness and like rigidity to their bite, very, very often, probably most often, you will see them par cooked. So a lot of the times you'll see beans or green beans, they'll be blanched or sometimes boiled first. All of these are because they're so durable and rigid in the way that they're textured. So what we're going to do today is we are going to par cook them, but very, very briefly. So what we're going to do first is we're going to sear them in our wok fry. And that's going to be how you get to, so this is drawing a little bit of inspiration and also deviating a little bit from our original recipe, or deviating a lot. This is also how you get that like kind of seared bean sprout or green bean that you probably would associate with like most Chinese foods. So whenever if you've ever had bean sprouts or green beans in a stir fry, that's how they do it. So it's seared in the wok first. And then after that, we're going to very, very briefly blanch it, probably for about 90 seconds, maybe even a little bit less than that. And that's going to give us like a really, really tender but also like seared piece of bean sprout. So we're going to get to all of that in a moment. But before we do anything else, so we can take a look. So the bean sprouts that I'm working with they look like they're already peeled. But actually there was one here a second ago. So these ones, I love using these ones because they already have the caps pulled off. So if you've ever come across a bean sprout, you can see clearly this one already has its cap removed. That cap is very integral. You definitely don't want to leave that thing on because no matter how much that you cook a green bean, it's going to be extremely chewy. So you want to make sure that that thing comes off before you move on to your wok fry. So in our case, these bean sprouts have already done the work for me, so I don't have to do that chopping. So all I'm doing right now is I'm just chopping these things in half to make sure that they take like manageable bites, and that's going to be about it. Green beans are one of your favorite ingredients. Yeah. Hey Sarah, how's it going? Yeah, red pepper flakes and garlic. Yeah, so that's the recipe that I just finished writing. It's for, I guess, like green bean chicken, which is like loosely inspired by what is essentially like garlic chicken, or like a recipe for garlic chicken. But the more that I've looked into it, the more I've discovered that garlic chicken means nothing. Garlic chicken just implies a recipe that has both garlic and chicken, which is like literally every stir fry. So I don't really know what garlic chicken is. But as far as I interpret it, I'm pretty sure it means bean sprouts, so I'm going to take a shot at that one. So yeah, that recipe is coming out probably in like a month, maybe a little less than that. So those are our bean sprouts. You can see now that we've finished chopping them, we have these nice, like about an inch long, maybe a little bit less than that, manageable bites. We had a little bit less work to do because I was using some slightly pre-chopped bean sprouts, or green beans. Which is really, really useful because we don't have to do as much prep work for shortcuts. All right, so that's our green beans. Next up, so our third and final vegetable is also going to be our most delicate vegetable. And you'll hear me say the exact same thing pretty much any time that we put an onion in a wok fry. Is that it's going to be a lot more fragile than every other vegetable that we're going to be putting in. So especially against something like a green bean or a bell pepper, which are both very, very durable veggies. An onion, on the other hand, is very, very fragile. So if we throw this in too early, what will happen is it will basically just fall apart, and then you're not going to have anything left. It's just going to disintegrate because an onion is mainly made up of water. So to that end, we have to be very careful with our timing here, because if it gets in too early, the other thing that we want to do here is make sure that we dice this pretty large, because if it gets diced too small, everything is just going to disappear again for the same reason. it's just all going to fall apart, which is not good. So I'm giving this a very, very large dice and setting it aside. And then this is going to be the last thing that gets into our stir fry. So this is going to be the very, very last thing that we cook. And it will probably only be in our wok fry for maybe a minute, maybe even less than that. And that's essentially what we're going for with these onions. We basically want them to be raw. So they're going to be like just past that raw stage where it will basically be seared at very, very high heat, and that's about it. And that, if you've ever had onions in really any stir fry from a restaurant, that's how they do it. It's cooked in a wok at extremely high heat for a very, very, very short period of time. Sometimes it's actually, sometimes I've had onions that are actually not cooked enough because they have done it for such a short and brief period of time that it's actually still raw, which is one of my pet peeves. Cool. Ooh, lemon zest. Yeah, that's nice. All right, next up, before we move on to our chicken, I'm going to assemble our sauce base here. So the sauce base, this is essentially going to be our glaze. And I have struggled quite a bit with glazes, especially with fried chicken glazes, mainly because they always seem to be a little bit too loose. So our goal here, and this is going to be true anytime that you're assembling a glaze with fried chicken or anything that you're trying to keep crispy, is that we need to make sure that we reduce the amount of liquid that's in our glaze today. So our glaze is going to have quite a bit of liquid, which means that we need to reduce that liquid in the wok before it combines with the chicken. So if you've ever had this problem where you cook something like a General Tso's chicken or like sesame chicken or any kind of like fried chicken, and then you toss it in the glaze, and then you have to wait for that glaze because it has too much liquid to reduce, and then you're reducing the glaze with the chicken in the wok. And then what happens once that chicken is already in the glaze is that it becomes soggy, and that's when you get like really, really soggy pieces of chicken in your General Tso's chicken. It's because it was reducing with the glaze in the wok. So what we're going to do today is we're going to reduce the glaze and then add it to the wok. So we might even do it off heat at that point, so that at the only time where the chicken and the glaze are combined together is when we're just tossing to combine. So there should be no point in time where the chicken is with the glaze and still cooking. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a very, very soggy, borderline mushy piece of chicken. Cool. So that was 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 1 tablespoon of sesame oil. Next up, this is going to be 1 tablespoon of mirin, which is a form of Japanese rice wine, followed by 2 tablespoons, excuse me, of rice vinegar. Then next up, this is going to be 1 tablespoon of oyster sauce, which, as the name implies, comes from the fermentation of oyster. So that means that we're going to get a lot of fishy umami derived from it. And then the last thing that we're going to add here, is the last thing? Oh, it's not quite the last thing. Second to last thing that I'm going to add here is going to be our brown sugar. So this is going to be, how much brown sugar? 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. And then finally, the last thing that we're going to add, probably the one thing that doesn't really belong in a stir fry, is going to be 2 tablespoons of black bean paste. So black bean paste, more commonly you would come across it in noodle dishes, so you see it a lot in like dishes like Zha Jiang Mian or other like Chinese stir fries based with noodle. It is very, very pungent and very, very overpowering, so you want to go easy on this stuff at this point because it can absolutely overpower a dish if you're not careful. There we go. Just enough. Actually, I'm going to add one more thing here, and it's going to be a little bit of heat. So I did notice that this recipe is a little bit lacking in heat, so I'm going to add This is going to be a single tablespoon of lao gan ma, or chili crisp oil. That's going to be lao gan ma is essentially red, I guess you could call it like red pepper flakes that have been like long cooked at a very, very low heat in sesame oil, I believe. Sesame or peanut oil. It might be peanut oil. And essentially what happens is when those chili flakes are cooked for a super long time in that oil at really, really low heat, is that those chili flakes start to give up their capsaicin. So we get this really, really interesting, but really, really mellow heat because it's just red pepper flake. But it's also like extremely pervasive because it's soaked in oil, so that oil is spreading that capsaicin all throughout the dish. So I love using it in cases like this where we're just going for a little bit of extra heat, but we don't want to overpower the dish because it's going to work really, really nicely in creating this super, super mellow and understated form of heat. So oftentimes you will also see me pair it with a little bit of doubanjiang, which is comes from the fermentation of chili pepper, and is a little bit more aggressive. So if you combine the two, then you get this nice combination of heat. Yeah, it has a little bit too much sugar, so I'm going to add a little bit more soy sauce. Yeah, that ought to do it. Cool, so this is our sauce base. As you can see, also based off of all the things that we just put in here, this is mostly liquid, so we want to be very, very careful as we reduce this sauce that it's reducing before the chicken combines with it. If you try and reduce it after the chicken combines, then you're going to end up with a very, very soggy piece of chicken. I can't stress that enough. No one likes soggy chicken. All right, next thing that we're going to assemble here, this is going to be a cornstarch slurry, which you will see come up in a lot of Chinese food. And it's exactly as the name implies. It's going to be cornstarch combined with a little bit of water. The amount of water doesn't particularly matter to us. Definitely what's more important is the amount of cornstarch. So that was 2 tablespoons of cornstarch with a small amount of water. And essentially what we're trying to do is make sure that this cornstarch is combined into a slurry so it's in a liquid form. So what we don't want to do is go and throw whole spoonfuls of cornstarch into our sauce because it will absolutely start clumping up with everything. So in order to make sure that we don't get big clumps of cornstarch floating around, we want that stuff to be dissolved in water before we move forward. What brand of chili oil? Yeah. So I believe the brand is called lao gan ma, so we could take a look. Is it go in focus? You could kind of see. It's called lao gan ma, which I believe means like old grandma, something like that. The brand that what you're looking for, though, if you're trying to find it in stores, is the one with this old lady on it. That's how you know. But the problem, so the tricky bit is that lao gan ma is the name of the brand, but it's also what we generally will refer to as this form of sauce because it's sort of like their flagship sauce, which is essentially chili oil. So it looks like this. Can you see that? You can't really see that. But what it is essentially is chili flakes that are soaked in oil. So that's what you're looking for. We'll see it. The English translation will say something like spicy chili crisp. And you will see a bunch of different translations because they have a number of different sauces. So they have something very, very similar that's also soaked in black bean paste, which is also really good, but not the same thing. They have another very, very similar thing, but it has chunks of peanut in it, which is also really good, but not particularly my taste. I don't like having peanuts floating around in my hot sauce, but I know I've actually had it many times. It's really good. But the one that you're looking for, I believe it will say something like spicy chili crisp or something like that. Chili crisp oil, something like that. All right. So next up, finally, we're going to get to our chicken here. So we can do this stuff last because there's no marinade involved. It makes cleaning up stuff a lot easier too. So today what we're going with is some chicken thigh, as you can see. This is not chicken breast. The original version that I had written while I was hacking the Panda Express recipe, it was using chicken breast for the sole purpose that Panda Express uses chicken breast and everything. I don't know why. I think it's a marketing thing. I think they do it because it makes people think that it's healthier. But I genuinely have no idea why they use chicken breast in everything. Honestly, I think it tastes very, very similar. Especially if you're going to fry chicken, I think it's going to end up tasting the same anyway. Because and I do have a slight preference for chicken thigh when I do like stir fries, so like a pad see ew or a pad keema or something like that, or a green bean chicken, which we just did, or it's coming up soon. Because it has a little bit more fat here, so you can see all of this fat on my chicken, all of that stuff, all of this stuff going on here. That fat is really useful for stir fries because it renders in stir fry, and it kind of like helps you create a thick sauce because it has so much fat coming off into the stir fry. In a fried chicken recipe like this, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. I think it's just going to end up being the same thing either way. So you could use chicken breast if you wanted to. You could use chicken thigh if you wanted to. I happen to have more chicken thigh on hand, mainly because chicken thigh is a lot cheaper than chicken breast. So I have more of it on hand. But use whatever you have. But just keep in mind, so the main differences between chicken breast and chicken thigh, lots of people ask me this, is that chicken thigh is cut from dark meat, so it's much, much darker. You'll notice that chicken breast will be a lot lighter, so this is very, very dark pink. Chicken breast would be very, very light pink. And it doesn't have nearly as much fat, so it would be a much leaner cut of beef or meat. All right. So that's our chicken. What we're going to do here is a breading. So we're going to do a pretty simple breading. This is going to be mainly cornstarch, flour, and egg. But first, let's clean things up. Yeah. Let's clean this up. Cool. So I'm cleaning up my cutting board, and we're going to start breading our chicken. So we're going to do a pretty standard two-station breading, which requires the use of the wet hand, dry hand technique, and I will show you why that's so important. All right, let's dig into it. Yeah, let's use this bowl. But like this. Short on bowls today. Cool. So what we're going to do is, first thing that we're going to do is our wet station. So this is our egg. And then we're going to whisk this up. And then coat it in our chicken. So a little bit of a shortcut, but essentially what we're doing is coating our chicken in that egg. And that's going to help our breading adhere to the chicken a little bit. So if you want, you can probably even skip that step because chicken thigh has a little bit of fat and it's a little bit more cohesive, or adhesive, excuse me. But I like doing it because it also helps create a little bit of fluff. So that egg is going to puff up in the fry, and that's going to give us like a little bit more crispiness and like a lot more fluffiness from that egg. And then next up in our second station is going to be our dry bits. So this is cornstarch, which should be a 1/4 cup of cornstarch. I don't think that's a 1/4 cup of cornstarch. I'm eyeballing. Also, we're out of cornstarch. And next up is going to be equal parts flour. So what you should have here are 1/4 cup of flour, 1/4 cup of cornstarch. And then lastly, just a little pinch of salt. I just like to show off that I could crack an egg one-handed. Yeah, except that every time I crack eggs one-handed, I would say like 40% of the time I get eggshells in the eggs. So it's not necessarily the greatest. Sorry. That camera will continue to turn off. There's not much I can do about it. All right. So that's our dry station. Now, and next up, what we're going to do is what I like to do. So at this point, if you're really lazy, you could just throw the chicken right into your dry station. and probably it would turn out fine. What I like to do is do each piece individually. If I was cooking on a large scale for a lot of people, I probably would just dump all of this straight into here and then just coat it, because I would be really lazy. But in my case, I like to take a little bit of extra time here. So what we want to do, and the reason that I like to take a little bit of extra time is kind of make sure that you don't overbread the chicken. So if you're not paying attention, and this is something that I come across in a lot of places that are not being super careful with how they bread the chicken, is that the piece of chicken that contains more breading than chicken, and that's like super irritating to me because you bite into a piece of chicken and it's mostly just breading. So what we want to do though, especially in a station like this, is we want to separate things. So I'm going to have my left hand being our wet hand, and then we're going to add it to our dry ingredients, and then use my right hand as the dry hand. So what we're essentially doing here, we call this the wet hand, dry hand technique, is we're keeping my left hand free from and never actually touching any of the dry ingredients. So you'll notice as we proceed that my right hand is going to start getting really clumped up. So we're going to have a whole bunch of flour stuck to my right hand as we keep going. But my left hand is actually going to stay pretty clean because it's not actually touching any of these dry ingredients. So that's super useful if you've ever had like batter claws, because it's going to keep your hands clean. Does my brother still get the leftovers? Yeah, he does. I'm actually going to drop some off tomorrow, so I might actually keep this fresh for him. He has also told me to just start freezing it, which I don't love, but I don't know why he likes that. Yeah, after this you're going to be so hungry. Yeah. Well, go eat some dinner. Did I find a place to put the wok? Yeah, I keep my wok in the stove. That's also like the only place that I've ever found to properly store a wok. I just put it in the oven, which is a little bit annoying because anytime that I use the oven, I have to take the wok out. But also, like, the problem is that a wok is like so large. I used to have it hanging on a wall, and then the wall hanger broke, and I think it pulled the wall out. So that's not so great. That was also when I had a cast iron wok though, so probably too heavy to hang from a wall anyway. Yeah. Cool. So this is the stage, like I mentioned before, that we call the wet hand, dry hand technique. It also probably is going to look very similar to pretty much every fried chicken that you've ever had. If you live in the States, this is probably the type of fried chicken that you'll eat most of the time. There's going to be a wet station that oftentimes is egg, like we're using today, but super often that wet station, it might include things like buttermilk. You might see like things like hot sauce or other things included in this wet station to impart more flavor. Our wet station is very simple today because I don't think that we need to impart too much flavor to the chicken at this point. But I have definitely messed around with some of those things, especially when I'm not doing glazes. So I did a popcorn chicken that was essentially this right here, but without the glaze, so without the second half, without the wok fry, which was super tasty. All of these things, you can do it if you want to or need to. I don't think that it's necessarily that important in this particular case because we're just going to cover it in a bunch of glaze anyway, so it's not going to be super useful anyway. So that's our chicken, as you can see. Got this big old batter claw on my right hand, but my left hand completely clean. Very useful. If you've never done the wet hand, dry hand technique, I highly recommend it. All right. So that's our chicken. I'm going to head over to the stove and we can start cooking, I think. Yeah, and it's actually at temperature. I remember to preheat the oil this time. So over on my stove, I've got my wok filled with my fryer oil. It is at 355. I want that to be closer to 375 before we start cooking. So for our fry, what we're going to do is our double fry technique today. which is essentially what we're going to do is we're going to fry everything once for a very, very brief amount of time, usually about a minute, maybe even a little bit less than that. We want that chicken to be pretty rare still when it comes out of the first fry. And then what we're going to do is we're going to rest it. So it's going to sit and rest for about a minute, maybe 2-3 minutes. And then we're going to add it back for a second fry at a higher temperature, and that higher temperature is going to start crisping things off. So essentially what that first fry is going to do is it's going to pull out a lot of moisture from the chicken, so that when we go and do the second fry, that oil isn't going to be working as hard to reduce and pull out moisture from the chicken because you've already done it, which means that as it's frying, that the heat from the oil isn't being expended on reducing moisture anymore. It's just being used to fry the chicken, so you get a much, much crispier piece of chicken because your fryer oil isn't spending its energy reducing moisture. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is add our chicken to a lower temperature. This is at 370. And I'm probably going to do this in 2 batches. Usually what I like to say is about 10, 11 pieces per batch. And that ought to do it. And then we're going to let that go for a full minute. Yeah. So we want this chicken to be pretty undercooked when we pull it out. It's definitely not going to be edible. We want pretty much raw chicken when this comes out. Because our goal here is not to cook the chicken. What we're trying to do is just pull some moisture out. Yeah. On my to-do list is get a spider. Eventually I will go out of the way and get a spider. Cool, so as we can see, our chicken is still pretty pale. We're gonna let that go for maybe another 40 seconds or so, and then we're gonna pull it out. Yeah. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So if you haven't checked the YouTube channel out yet, that's where all of the recipes live. So today we're doing a General Tso's chicken hack that I had written based off of or inspired by the Panda Express General Tso's chicken that came out. I think that was out. The General Tso's chicken from Panda Express was like back in 2016 or so. It was since discontinued, but that recipe though, it lives over on my YouTube channel, so if you want to check that out, it's all over there. The recipe is a part of a larger series that we've been doing where I've been hacking a lot of like classic Chinese American dishes, so things like General Tso's chicken, Panda Express. A lot of Panda Express classics come up in that series, and basically what we do is we take a look at a lot of those classic dishes that come from Chinese American foods, like General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, kung pao chicken, all of these things that come from Chinese American food. And then we kind of deconstruct it and take a look at what those dishes would look like if they were assembled in more in the fashion of how you would assemble a traditional wok fry. So we remove those American qualities and take a look at what you still have when you remove those qualities and see what those qualities are. So with a dish like this, it's really interesting because General Tso's chicken does not really come from Chinese food. It comes from American food, basically just American fried chicken. So that's really fun to do, so we can kind of take a look at all of the things that we're adding to make it seem or feel a little bit more authentically Chinese. So a couple of the things that we're adding today, there's some Shaoxing wine. Did we use Shaoxing wine? Yeah, we did. There's a little bit of Lao Gan Ma, some oyster sauce, all of these things, black bean sauce, all of these things are things that come from traditional wok frying, but definitely not things that you would come across a lot in a lot of Chinese American cuisine. So that's a fun series. If you're looking for stuff like that, it's a fun one to check out. It all lives over on my YouTube channel, so if you live watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. Watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. Those are out every Friday, so this Friday coming up, as tomorrow actually, we're going to come out with a recipe for a Korean gimbap, which is a form of like a rice roll. It basically looks like a piece of sushi, but with dramatically different things that are in it. Also comes from a different Asian culture. So, yeah. How much videos have I done of cooking? I used to know the answer to this. We've been doing a new recipe every Friday for like the last year. Actually, I think we just hit the 1 year mark. So I think I just passed the cake day on my Reddit channel, which was when I started doing recipes. So I think probably like a little past 52, so probably like 53, 54, something like that. Last I checked, there was close to like 8 to 10 hours worth of recipes that you binge watch, because I know people binge watch those recipes a lot, so it's fun. All right, so I'm reheating my oil here. That's why we've been holding off. This is at 350 again. And we're gonna add our second batch of chicken in. And we're gonna do the exact same thing here. This should be about 10 pieces. And we're adding it carefully. A wise man would probably use tongs. I'm not gonna. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Wow is right. That was a lot of recipe videos. So. The channel started, I was originally doing like gift recipes for the subreddit gift recipe. And then the channel kind of started because I started doing more long form content. So some of those gift recipes are also over on the YouTube channel. All right, while that's going, we could take a look. Here's our first batch of chicken. It is very, very pale, so the camera contrast is going to do a little bit of help here to make it look a little bit more cooked than it actually is. But this chicken, despite how it looks, is very, very pale. It's like basically a pale yellow, and is very, very chewy still. So it's got like this nice chewy quality to it. If this was chicken that we were trying to cook, I would call this maybe like 50, maybe 60% cooked through. So definitely, if we were to try and eat this right now, still raw chicken, not great to try. But what's most important is that our first batch of chicken has all of its moisture pulled out of it. So what we're going to be left with is this very, very dry piece of chicken that when we put it back into the fry, it's going to be able to get much, much crispier in that second fry. Yeah. Cool. All right. I'm gonna let that go for maybe another like 20 seconds, and then we'll add our second batch in. Yeah. Cool. Oh yeah, the last thing I'll mention, so if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet, definitely hop over if you're looking for stuff like that. We're working our way to 4,500 subs by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. If you've seen the hamster eating ramen, that's Hamcharl. Hamcharl gets to eat every time someone subscribes, so please feed him. He's very hungry. All right, here's our second batch coming out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reheat our oil one more time. Our oil is back down to 315, so we want that oil to be very hot. What we're looking for this time on our second fry is our fry oil to be closer to 400 degrees F, which is going to be a little bit hotter, and it's also going to cook a lot faster. So that's going to give us, number one, the deep dark browning that we're looking for, but also number two, that very, very crisp piece of chicken. So we can take a look. Back over here. We have here on our right is our first batch of chicken. Here on our left is our second batch of chicken. And this first batch is nice and cooled down. It's also pulled all of its moisture out so that when we put this first batch back into the wok at the higher temperature, it's going to be able to get a much, much crispier piece of chicken than if we had just left it in the fryer. So that's one thing that you could do is if we were to just leave it in the fryer and let it cook for a full like 5 minutes or so. What you would end up with is like a lot of the heat exertion and a lot of the time that your oil is spending to cook. It's actually not frying. What it's doing is just cooking off moisture. So whenever you hear a fryer sizzling, that's what it's doing. So that crackling when you put something into the fryer is the sound of water meeting oil. So when water and oil combine, that oil is basically, the water is essentially evaporating. So that oil, because your fryer is spending so much energy cooking off that moisture, it's not spending that energy frying your chicken. So that's not great. Because it means that you're going to have a much cooler temperature to your oil trying to cook the chicken, which is how you end up with soggy chicken, which is not great. So in order to combat that, we're frying it first, pulling out some of that moisture, and then frying it a second time at a much higher temperature to get a nice crispy piece of chicken now that we've removed all of that moisture. So if you were really committed, you could also pat down the chicken at this point. I'm not going to bother doing that because I'm lazy. It's double fried, how could it not be good? Yeah, that's exactly my theory too. I've also messed around with a bunch of different ways of double frying. Probably, I think my favorite way of double frying is with a tempura batter. And I think actually probably the main reason why I love doing a tempura batter is because it's really, really easy to do. Tempura batter, essentially all it is all of the dry, all of the wet combined into a batter, so not a breading, but a batter. And then you just throw the chicken into it and give it a toss. So you don't actually have to do any wet hand, dry hand. You don't have to do any breading. Basically, you're just dumping the chicken into the batter and then putting the chicken into the fry from there. So it makes it a lot easier. But also, I love the fact that, so a tempura batter, if you do a tempura batter with soda water, the CO2 from the soda water helps create a little bit of bubble and like caramelization, which create a little bit more fluffiness to your fried chicken. So that's a fun little trick that I love doing. You don't trust me because I'm not wearing a chef hat. I probably should. Yeah. Tap down the chicken for chicken weapons. Yeah, exactly. All right, our fryer's at 360. I'm going to wait for that to be closer to 400, and then we're going to get back to our second fry. Yeah, let's go back over here. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I pretty much only wear a hat when I cook for other people, just to make sure that I don't get hair in other people's food. But if I'm just cooking for myself, I really don't care. I don't mind eating my own hair, I guess. Maybe I should. All right. So we're at 380. I'm gonna push that temperature a little bit hotter. I'm also getting a little impatient, so I might go in at like 390. But we want our fryer oil to be much, much hotter the second fry so that we can cook it for a very, very brief amount of time. Yeah. Cool. Alright, that ought to do it. Here's our second batch going back in. Yeah. Well, what do I think about air fryers? Yeah, I've not used air fryers that much, but I have used it a bit, or a little bit. And my experience with air fryers, and I feel like this might be because maybe I'm just using the air fryer wrong, but every time that I've tried to use an air fryer, I usually end up with chicken, or like sometimes I've actually air fried tofu quite a bit. And usually what happens is it gets really crispy at first, and then it gets really soggy very quickly. So like within like 15 minutes maybe, it becomes pretty soggy, which is kind of a bummer. But I guess if you eat things from out of the air fryer really quickly, then it will probably be okay. But that's generally been my experience, is that it doesn't seem to stay crispy for a very, very long time. But it's certainly like more healthy, I guess. You have a cat and its hair is and everything, yeah. When I used to own a dog, I used to have a Labrador Retriever, and her hair got into everything. I haven't had a dog in like 6-7 years. My dog passed away like 6 years ago. And to this day, I still find her hair and stuff, which is crazy. She's been dead for half a decade, and I still find her hair and stuff. All right. So we're gonna let that go for maybe another 30-45 seconds, and then we'll pull it out. A little bit longer. The last thing that I like to mention when we're frying chicken like this is that you also want to remember to account for carryover cook, which is essentially remember that the chicken, it's going to continue to cook for a little bit when you pull it out of the fryer because it's still covered in oil. So when you pull it out of the fryer, it's probably going to cook for another like 10-15 seconds. So what I usually say is pull it about maybe 10 seconds before it's going to be done cooking. So this is going to continue to cook as we pull it out. So over on the cutting board, I actually took the time to set up our dryer rack, finally. And what we're going to do is, so we don't want to leave, you can if you want, I have many situations just left the chicken in the bowl, and it's probably going to be fine. But if you want to try and maximize the amount of crunch that you keep in your chicken, make sure that you don't leave it sitting in the bowl, because what will happen is when it's sitting in the bowl, it's going to get soggy because it's sitting in oil at the bottom. You see all that oil down there? That's going to just kind of hang out. Which is not going to be great. So do yourself a favor. This is actually not even a dryer rack. This just came out of my toaster oven, which works really great as a nice dryer rack. I actually have a dryer rack, but I don't use it because it's not as small. But do yourself a favor. Rest that chicken on the dryer rack so that you don't end up with soggy pieces of chicken. What are we frying the chicken in? Today we are using corn oil. I have fried in pretty much every type of oil that you can imagine. So I've done probably the most common thing that I've used was canola oil. Mainly when I fry chicken, what I'm mostly looking for is the cheapest type of oil that I could get, which is usually canola oil. Most recently, I found a pretty good deal on corn oil, and I'm kind of into corn oil. I found that the corn oil has been able to stretch for longer. So I think this is like the 5th run of this corn oil. And I think I'm going to get at least one more run out of it, which has never been the case when I use canola oil. So I actually don't know why that's the case, but for whatever the reason, this corn oil, it seems to be stretching for a lot longer. All right, so here's my chicken, my second batch of chicken going in for its second fry. Our fryer oil, by the way, is back up to 390. Yeah. And we're going to let that go just like we did with the first batch for a full, maybe about a minute or two. Mainly what we're looking for at this point is we're keeping an eye on the general color and browning of the chicken. So we want, this time, the first batch, it was pretty pale. The second batch, we need this to be deeply golden brown. In the South, you call it Earl, yeah. You allow so much cat hair in your food, yeah. I haven't had that problem in a long time, but when I was a dog owner, you just sort of what's crazy is you stop noticing that your house is covered in hair, and then you don't notice it until your friends come over and they tell you hey, you have dog hair everywhere, you should vacuum. But yeah, when I owned the dog though, we used to have to vacuum a crazy amount of times to keep the floor clean. Alrighty, so there's my chicken in the second fry. We're gonna let that go for maybe another minute and change maybe. What we're looking for at this point is very, very deep golden browning. Essentially everything that we're looking for in a piece of fried chicken. This should look like finished chicken when we pull it out. So if you're not sure, I guess the internal temperature of chicken is very, very important. So it's not like beef or ground beef where you can undercook it. You can go for medium or medium rare. Chicken only has one temperature that it should be at, and that should be 165 degrees F internal. Any lower than that, I guess, according to FDA, any lower than that, it's not safe to eat. Usually I shoot when I cook chicken for closer to 145, 150, because I find that it's going to be a little bit more tender at that lower temperature. It's also like perfectly safe to eat. But according to the USDA, the US government, FDA, 165. You can, at this point, you could get your meat thermometers out and stick it in there and check. I don't usually care because I've gotten pretty good at eyeballing, but if you're not sure, definitely use a meat thermometer. Are we using white meat? Today we're using dark meat, actually. So today we're using chicken thigh, which comes from dark meat. I have definitely done this recipe with chicken breast, though, and it works fine. I found that it's pretty much indistinguishable for recipes like this. I was actually talking about that earlier. But for a dish like this where we're just frying chicken, I don't particularly find a huge difference between chicken breast and chicken thigh. I think it's just going to end up exactly the same. With a lot of stir fries, I do have a slight preference for chicken breast or chicken thigh, but that's not necessarily because it's got dark meat. The reason that I have that preference is because it has more fat to it. So I love chicken thigh in a stir fry because of its extra fat. So you can make use of that extra fat, and it's going to help you build like thicker and more cohesive sauces because that fat is going to render into your stir fry. Whereas a piece of chicken breast is a lot leaner, so you're going to end up with like a super like lean and less fatty sauce element, which is still going to be fine. But I loved using chicken thigh when I have it available. Also, chicken thigh is cheaper per pound, so that's useful too. But honestly, for a fried dish like this, since we're just frying chicken, that fat is not really going to matter. Yeah, it's cheaper, exactly. It's cheaper too. So the fat is not really going to matter anyway. So today I'm using chicken thigh, but the main reason that I'm using chicken thigh is because it's what I have. It's what's in the refrigerator, or freezer. All right, so back over on the stove, what we're going to do is very, very carefully, I cannot express how carefully, we're going to pour out our fryer oil, so. There it goes. So fryer oil, it is not the same as a boiling pot of water. It is much, much more dangerous than a boiling pot of water, specifically for the reason that it's not water, it's fryer oil. So as you can imagine, it's a lot hotter and it's going to be a lot more damaging if you get it on you. So when you pour that fryer oil out, I can't express this enough, exercise a lot of caution because you do not want to drop that fryer oil on your foot or on your hand or anywhere near you. It will definitely burn the crap out of your skin. So be careful when you're removing your fryer oil. Be really, really careful. All right, so what I'm doing next, so I'm rinsing out my wok, and then we're going to get started on our wok fry. Yeah. So I'm going to get my wok heated up here, and then we're going to start cooking. Meanwhile, we can take a look at our finished chicken here. It's over on our dryer rack. We've got all of this nice deep dark browning going on with our chicken that's going to be really, really useful because it's going to help us create a very, very crunchy piece of chicken. So if you wanted to, right now, you could even just eat it right now, and that's going to be a real crispy piece of chicken for you. So we could take a look. Here's our finished pieces of chicken. It is very, very crispy. Got all this nice bubbling and like blistering. All of that nice blistering is going to be really useful. And that's what we're going to bite into when we eat our crispy pieces of chicken. We're going to leave this on this dryer rack and keep drying and like let it cool down over on this dryer rack. So we don't want to put it into a bowl at this point because if it gets into a bowl, it's just going to start getting soggy. So we want to keep this chicken elevated. You throw your wok outside. Well, I guess I've done that before. Carbon steel has a quality about it where it definitely like oxidizes very quickly. Oftentimes it will oxidize for no reason at all. I've had my carbon steel woks just oxidize just because it felt like it. Sometimes maybe a little bit of moisture in the air, I don't know. So carbon steel is real finicky, so I've never thought about trying to store that stuff outside. Oh no, the oil, you store the oil, yeah. What I do is I keep the oil in my garage and then I tie it up. I'm a little bit worried that rats are gonna get to it, but I haven't had that problem yet, so we'll find out. I tie it up really, really tightly in plastic bags. All right. So next up, we're going to start our wok fry, but we're going to, so I mentioned this earlier too, we're very specifically going to do our wok fry in a certain order because the vegetables that we're cooking are of varying degrees of fragility. So today we're cooking some green beans, some bell peppers, and some onions. Those onions are very, very delicate, and the green beans are a lot more durable, even more durable than those bell peppers. So what we want to do today, what we're going to do is start off by searing our green beans, and then we're going to blanch them. So the first thing we're going to do, as always, we're going to add, this is going to be about 4 tablespoons of peanut oil, and then our long yao, which is essentially coating that hot wok in that cold oil. And then the first thing we're going to do is add our bean sprouts carefully. And then I'm going to spread this pretty evenly, or as evenly as I can, so that we can sear the bean sprouts, or green beans, not bean sprouts. Green. So just like if we were cooking like a piece of steak or anything that we're trying to sear, I'm giving this a good even coating so that it's nice and spread out along that wok. Any part of the green beans that are touching the wok is going to sear. So we want as much of it as possible to be in contact with that wok. So the main goal here is to make sure that we don't have green beans stacked on top of each other. So if a green bean is on top of another green bean, then it's not going to sear properly. So. And just like we do with anything else that we're searing, we're going to let that sit undisturbed for a full 2.5 minutes. And that's going to be how we start getting that deep, dark crispiness. Yeah. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes coming out over on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday, we did a recipe for tomato beef chow mein, which is my mom's favorite like Chinese takeout dish when I was a kid, at least. I don't think she eats that stuff anymore. Week before that, we did a Chinese dessert called a jin dui, which is a sesame rice ball. The week before that, I don't remember. I think we did some kind of stir fry, I think. Lots of fun stuff coming out every Friday. So this Friday coming up, we're doing a gimbap, which is a Korean rice roll, or like a Korean sushi roll, I guess. And it's done with a little bit of bulgogi steak, so like barbecue beef steak in a rice roll. One of my favorite types of rice rolls. All of that stuff, it lives over on my YouTube channel, so if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet, that's a good place to start. In addition to all of those recipe videos, that's also where our concurrent live stream lives. So if you want to know what we're going to be cooking next, there's a full schedule of all of the live streams that live over there. So you can look that stuff up and find out what we're going to be cooking next. It's a fun place to go. We're working our way to 4,500 subscribers by the end of the month, so if you want to help hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lots of fun content. What else? Oh yeah, there's a hamcharo. If you haven't seen hamcharo yet, he's the hamster that eats ramen. He only gets to eat ramen when you feed him. That's when you subscribe, so please subscribe. All right. So we've got our bean sprouts searing here. This is going to go for another 15 seconds. And you can probably see it. I think you could see it in the camera. But it's searing quite a bit already. How old is the wok? I think like 1.5 years. I actually own 4 woks now, so, but this is probably the one that I use the most. Ooh, almost caught on fire there. All right, so I'm giving those bean sprouts a toss. You could definitely see it now. There's lots of nice searing and crisping up that's going on there. And then the next thing that we want to do, I'm going to add just a little bit of water. This might be like maybe a 1/4 cup of water. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to cover this. And that's going to go covered for another minute. And then what's going to happen is, so the reason that we're covering it right now, we could look at something else because that's real boring. The reason that we're covering it right now is because that bean sprout, that green bean is really, really thick and dense, which is not going to be super conducive to cooking through. So even in a really, really aggressive wok fry, we're still going to have a lot of trouble getting that bean sprout to cook through. So we're adding a little bit of water, and it's going to help get a nice, like, cooked through but still toothsome piece of chicken. Where's the chicken? Yeah, it's right here. What does the water do? Yeah, so it's essentially steaming it. So like a combination of steaming and blanching, which is gonna, basically what we're trying to do is just like cook through some of that rawness. So I've also tried, you could probably do it without the steam, but it's still gonna be a little bit more crunchy than you want it to. So we're just trying to cook it through a little bit more than that wok fry is gonna really allow us to anyway, on its own. All right. All right, so I'm removing my top. This is not actually a top, this is just an oven pan. And then we're gonna, basically what I'm gonna do at this point is just cook off some of that water now, which should not take long. At the high heats that we're cooking at, oops, go back over here. At the high heats that we're cooking at, that really should cook off in maybe like 20, maybe 30 seconds. Burger or pizza? That's going to depend on the type of burger and the type of pizza. If we're talking like really cheap pizza, for sure, burger. It's a loaded question. All right, so there's still a little bit of water left that I'd like to cook off here. And then once that's really evaporated, then we're going to move on to our remaining veggies. Yeah. Cool. Woo. No, that's definitely water. All right, so next up what we're going to do is, so I'm moving everything to one side. And then we're going to add our aromatics. So this is very important when you cook aromatics, like garlic and ginger, which is what we're using today, is that stuff has got to get in contact with your hot oil. So if the garlic and ginger does not reach the oil, like we are doing right now, is you're not going to get very much flavor from it, because what we're looking for are its aromatic flavor. And that aromatic flavor only blooms out when in contact with the oil. So if we were to just put that garlic and ginger on top of the green beans, what would happen is it would basically just steam, or like it might fry a little bit when you toss, but if you put it on top of the green beans and then try to bloom it, it wouldn't make as much contact with that oil. So what we want to do is make sure that it reaches that oil so that we get those aromatic qualities out, like so. And then once it becomes fragrant, usually about 10-15 seconds, then we can start tossing it. All right, next up is my bell pepper going in. Are you guys in the channel? Yeah, the channel is a play on Yan Can Cook, who is one of my favorite chefs growing up. I used to watch his PBS show a lot. It is an homage to Yan Can Cook. So those are our bell peppers in the wok right now. We're gonna let that go for maybe 2 minutes or so. And what we're trying to do is just cook off a little bit of that rawness. Bell peppers, unlike onions, are pretty durable vegetables, so we want that to be in the wok with a little bit of head start before we add those onions in. Whereas those onions are probably only going to cook in that wok fry for maybe a minute, maybe even less than a minute. Those onions are going to be in for a very, very brief amount of time because they're so delicate. But the bell peppers, they're a lot more durable, so in order to make sure that we're not eating raw bell peppers at this point, we want to give it a little bit of head start before the onions. Pizza in New Haven style. I'm not familiar with New Haven pizza. I would love to know more. I live here in Oakland, and California pizza is the worst. I hate California pizza. California pizza is the kind of pizza with like broccoli and like Brussels sprouts. I've had a lot of like arugula pizzas. It's the worst. Very healthy. Yeah, you used to watch the show. Yeah, he actually is still doing stuff. So I follow him on Instagram, and he's got a bunch of stuff. I don't think Martin Yan runs his Instagram, but it's a good place to keep up to date with all of Martin Yan's stuff. So I know he just came out with, I think it was a line of like frozen. I want to say it was actually a line of frozen General Tso's chicken. And he's still around. He's kicking around, doing stuff. I used to watch his. Like, he used to have this super goofy face, and would just like chop crazy fast, but just like look at you deadpan with this really goofy smile. And it was my favorite thing watching when I was a kid. All right, there's our onions going in finally. We're gonna let that go for a real short amount of time. All right, so at this point, I'm just keeping an eye on those onions. We're trying to cook off a little bit of rawness here. I would say maybe it's kind of going a little bit slower than I'd like because the wok is starting to fill up. So maybe about 2 minutes, maybe a little less than that. So that's a good point to point out right now, is that as things start adding to the wok, so as you get more stuff in the wok, what's going to happen is the wok's temperature is going to start dropping. So our wok is starting to cool down because there's a whole bunch of stuff in it. So if the onions were in first, they probably would have been done cooking by now. But because it's going in and there's all this stuff in here, our wok temperature is pretty low. So I'm only tossing it very occasionally, and I'm not going to agitate the wok too much anymore because I want to make sure that the wok is able to sort of build up more heat because it's cooling down a little bit more than I'd like. So at this point, it's going to be okay because we're actually done cooking veggies, so we're about to pull this out of the heat. But if at any point you notice that's happening and you're still trying to cook stuff, that's a really bad sign. It means that you added too many things to the wok at once, and it means that you needed to batch cook more. So if you had to, we could have like pulled the green beans out and then cooked our bell pepper and onion and then pulled those out. We didn't do that because I was lazy, but if you notice that's happening and you have a lot more stuff to cook, it's a big problem because you're on your way to basically like an oatmeal-y stir fry, which is no bueno. All right, yeah, that's nearly there. You bought his cleaver? Yeah. I have never been a huge fan of chopping with a cleaver, but I definitely have my eye on one. There's nothing special about his cleaver. It's just like a normal Chinese cleaver, but it's just like the level of accuracy that guy has with a cleaver is insane. Like, yeah, I used to love watching that guy chop stuff. PBS doesn't get enough credit for the shows they do. Yeah, Sarah, that's totally right. They're totally underappreciated. There were so many great shows on PBS when I was a kid. All right, that's looking good. Let's pull this out. Not gonna be big enough. Wow, missed. All right, so what I'm doing here, I'm pulling my vegetables out. Here are all of our veggies. And then the last thing that we're gonna do is our sauce. So this is super important and also something that I have gone back and forth on whether or not you need to do it. What we're going to do is before we combine our wok fry, so over on the stove, we have our veggies resting. And then back here on the cutting board, we have our chicken here resting. So at this point, we could just throw everything into the wok and give it a toss and call it a day. But what's going to happen is if we add all of this stuff back to the wok at the same time, we're going to be waiting a little bit of time for that sauce to reduce and get like thickened. and then we have this thick saucy glaze. That's going to be a problem if the chicken is in the fry and the vegetables are in the fry while we wait for that stuff to reduce, because it's going to be starting to turn soggy. So the vegetables are going to start turning soggy, the chicken is going to start turning soggy, the breading is going to start coming off of the chicken. All of these are things that we don't want to happen. So what we want to do before we do that is reduce the sauce first. So what I'm going to do instead is add our sauce first. Along with our cornstarch slurry. Also a great opportunity to deglaze too. Then next, I'm gonna add all of my veggies, and finally, my chicken. So at this point, I'm even gonna kill the heat here, and then we're just gonna toss everything. So right now we're not even cooking on heat. This is going to be a pretty cold wok pretty soon. And our goal really is to just keep everything nice and crispy. And that ought to do it. So the very last thing that we want to do anytime that we're cooking in a carbon steel wok, this might even be true if you're cooking in a carbon steel pan too, is give that thing a rinse while it's still hot. It's going to be a lot easier to clean while it's hot. Once that carbon steel, once it cools down, things are going to start sticking to it, so it's not going to be fun to clean. Once you have a cold wok, because then you're going to have to start scrubbing and just generally doing a lot more work to get that thing cleaned up. So what I like to recommend when we're done cooking is clean it. It takes an extra like 30 seconds. It's a little bit frustrating because you want to just sit down and eat because there's food in front of you. But save yourself a little bit of grief, or a lot of grief and trouble. Clean this thing while it's hot. Yeah. What was in the sauce? Yeah, there's a couple of things in this sauce. I think, to me, the things that stand out the most is the use of black bean paste, which is why it's got this like kind of a darker color, so a darker shade to it. Most General Tso's chicken that you'll come across is a little bit lighter because it's got more honey to it, like more honey and more of a glaze element to it. This particular General Tso's chicken, it's using black bean sauce, which is why it's sort of darker and like, yeah, just a little bit more darker in color. That's coming from the black bean sauce. But yeah, I also agree. That's why I love combining red bell peppers with green beans, because they're really pretty. All right. So like I mentioned earlier, when we were combining this chicken, the only time that the chicken was actually in the wok, other than when it was deep frying, was when we were just tossing to combine. So there's really no point where that chicken is really combining with a liquid agent. That's super, super important. And kind of a lesson that I've learned a little bit in the hard way over the many times that I have tried to cook fried chicken, is that the glaze, it's got to be reduced before it's introduced to the chicken. If you try and reduce that sauce while the chicken is in the wok, you're going to basically what you're going to be doing is boiling the fried chicken, which is going to end up with kind of a soggy piece of chicken. It's not great. So by reducing that sauce before the chicken gets in the wok, also before the veggies get in the wok, we're able to keep this nice and crisp. Give it a taste. Yeah. Super, super crispy because it basically is just right out of the fryer. Not really spending much time in the wok. Also like a really, really interesting flavor to it from that black bean sauce. That's kind of unlike any other fried or General Tso's chicken that I've ever had, at least. It's not nearly as sweet. The only thing that was sugary was the 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. I think in the Panda Express hack I used, there was like a full, like half cup of sugar in there. So by reducing that amount of sugar quite a bit, kind of leaves room for that black bean sauce to really shine. And honestly, one of my favorite fried chicken dishes right now. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. The other thing that I love is the different number of different vegetables that we added, so it's kind of where all of that bright color comes from. Those were in the original Panda Express recipe, I think, that we did. And I love that like nice contrast. I love doing green beans with onion because it's very, very pretty. So it's nice bright greens, bright reds, and that nice sharp white color. General Tso's chicken, hard to find a good one. Yeah, there's also like a lot of different interpretations of it because it's like it's a dish that has existed for so long in the States. Yeah, it's just like it's hard to find like a consistent consistently good one. Or like a consistent one that you're looking for, unless you're going to the same place. So I love cooking this one because it's like, this is honestly a General Tso's chicken that's pretty much unlike any other General Tso's chicken I've ever had because it's using a whole bunch of stuff that I've never seen in most wok fries. Where's General Tso? What I think you're talking about is the search for General Tso, I think. And I did. I love that series. That documentary is really, really interesting. I also learned a lot about like, what's really interesting is that they frame it in the context of like General Tso's chicken, but it's really not about General Tso's chicken. What it's really about is like how Chinese food ended up in America, and that's really, really fascinating to me. And it actually inspired the series that this dish is based off of. So what we've been doing is a series where we've been like hacking Chinese American foods, and it's actually inspired by that documentary. In that series, basically what we've been doing is like deconstructing a lot of like Chinese American classics that come from Chinese American foods, things like General Tso's chicken, also things like honey sesame chicken. We did a lot of stuff from Panda Express, and kind of take a look at what those dishes look like if you were to remove their American qualities. It's really interesting. Because what you end up doing is sort of like tracing back the origins of these dishes, and like what oftentimes you'll find out with things like General Tso's chicken is that a lot of this stuff it doesn't come from Chinese food. It comes just purely out of American food. So like General Tso's chicken is really just an American like glazed fried chicken served on top of rice with like a little bit of like usually it has like honey and rice vinegar. I think that's usually the big two. What I have been doing in that series, we've been like deconstructing those dishes and removing their American qualities and then reconstructing them with more traditional approaches to wok frying, which is really interesting. So basically what this ends up being today is what we ended up doing is this is basically a General Tso's chicken that's drawing a lot of influence from a Zha Jiang Mian, which is a Chinese wok fried noodle. That's where that black bean sauce comes from, and then you end up with something that kind of looks like this, which is really interesting because it's basically neither. It's not Chinese food nor is it American food, so it's really interesting. So that's a fun series. That all lives over on my YouTube channel too. So we haven't done, actually I just shot a recipe video for that one. So that's a series that I should be adding to more often, but I haven't. But yeah, that one's up on the YouTube channel. Lots of fun content coming up. Those recipes are out every Friday, by the way, so if you're trying to find stuff like that, or if you're entertained by watching me cook stuff, that's a fun place to start. We've got new recipes out every Friday, and that's also where the live stream lives behind me. So you can check out what we're going to be streaming next. The recipe, or that stream schedule goes out, I think, 3 weeks and change now. So you can find out, for the folks who have been watching over on YouTube, they knew that I would be streaming this recipe 3 weeks ago, basically. And that's also in those live stream schedules. It has a whole list of all of the ingredients that go in the things that I'm cooking. So if you want, you can go and pick up those ingredients and cook with me, which is always a lot more fun. Mongolian beef, yeah, I think that was the last thing that I did that added to that series. It was a Mongolian beef that was inspired by the PF Chang's Mongolian beef, which is super fun. And Mongolian beef is a really interesting one because it actually does, Mongolian beef comes from Hong Kong street food. So it actually has quite a bit of origins from like original or like genuine Chinese traditional food. But the type of Mongolian beef that you probably had is, if you live in the States, is probably not very close to that. What I discovered when I kind of like took apart the PF Chang's version is that like there's a lot more emphasis on like number one, like sweetness, but also number two, just like steak and just like quality of steak. And what I think is like a good quality Mongolian beef is more about like heat. There's a little bit more the tangent peppers. To me, that's really what makes a Mongolian beef pop. So. Lots of stuff like that living over on the YouTube channel. We're working our way to 4,500 subscribers by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lots of fun stuff coming up. Tomorrow, which is also a Friday, we're going to have the Korean gimbap recipe coming out, which is a Korean rice roll that's made with a little bit of barbecue beef or barbecue steak inside called bulgogi. And it's one of my favorite dishes, also inspired by another film called Minari. So, yeah. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll be here doing dishes, so feel free and drop your questions in the chat if I missed it. I miss stuff all the time. All right, thanks everyone. I'll see you. What we're doing Monday. Oh yeah, that's what we're going to be doing. I'll see you Monday. Monday we're going to be cooking through the recipe that's coming out tomorrow. So the Monday coming up next week, we're going to be cooking some gimbap, which is going to be really fun and also really challenging. Gimbap is really hard to make, so take a look. All right, thanks everyone. Bye.
Want to be, baby, yes. stay stoned on your lip all the time. I live for love all the same old places. Found the bottom was always down. But you poured out your heart, and I didn't want to waste it. There's nothing like your love to give me your red sweet strawberry wine. Ooh, you're as warm as a glass of beer. Darling, I'll stay the storm on your love all the time. You're as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. You're bad, warm as a glass of brandy. Darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time.
Leaving with the babies in a